Alright everybody, welcome back. So what we've done so far already this year is we've covered how to get data, the good ways to do it. Now what we're looking at is how do we do something with the data, make it useful, beneficial for people to go ahead and take a look at, and make it easy, a lot easier than looking at a list that we have. So what you have is you have our fantasy football scores for all the weeks, the 3 weeks so far in this NFL season. And let's go ahead and do our first graph. And the first one should be nice and easy, it's what's called a stem and leaf plot. Okay, so what we want to do is the first step is we want to order everything, put it in numerical order. Increasing order is the best way that we're going to want to do that. So I've already done that to save a little bit of time. And then after that, it's pretty simple. We take a look at all the values that we have, and we go ahead and line them up with what there is. So first of all, I see I've got a value in the 50s, all the way up to a value in the 150s. So what I want to do first is I'm going to create my stems. Now the stems are the bigger part of the numbers. So in this case, I've got tens and hundreds, so I'm going to go with the tens digits as my stems. Sometimes if you have smaller numbers with decimals, your stems might just be the single digits unit. So let's go ahead and start off with the tens. So I'm going to create my stems. Alright, so I see I've got a 50 all the way up to 150, so I'll go 5. Alright, so nice and easy. So I've got all those. Now all we have to do is we put the leaves on, and the leaves are just going to be the trailing digits that we have. So we see the first one would be a 0, representing 50 would be 50. After that we've got 70, 72, and we want to make sure that we put even spacing between those. So we can do a comma, or you don't have to do a comma. I'll go ahead and do it today. But we want nice even spacing so that we don't see it all spread out. 72, 3. Okay, so we see all those values that we have, and now notice we've got a blank here of 60. That's okay. We wouldn't want to leave it out. Sometimes I see people leave out the 60. That's wrong. We want to show that there's a gap here between these values. All right, jump into the 80s. 5, 6, 6, 8, 8, 8. Okay, we got our 80s. Let's take a look at the 90s. 3, 4, 8, 9. Now I have no 100, so I'll skip over that again. And now for 111, notice we got the 11 here, and then we're just going to tack the 1 on. 1, 1. And again, I'm trying to keep my spacing here pretty consistent if I can. 18. All right, and then 12s. 22. Let's see. 23. 28, and then we got 30, 40, 42, and then we got 51 all the way up there. Alright, so there's all of our values that we have, so we can see how this works out. Now what we always want to do is we always want to put a title on this, so it'll be Cosby Fantasy Football. And we always want to put a key on, that's important, so I know what these values are. Otherwise this could be 5.0, right? So I want to say 50 equals 50. Alright, and we want to put our units on here. This is points. And you know, if any of you guys know Miss Ferguson, this is her all the way down here at the bottom. This up here, the 151. You know, I'm just saying that might be my score, might not be. So that's it. Now the things that we want to talk about when we describe this distribution. We now want to talk about shape, center, and spread. So we'll talk about this more in class. But in this case, if I notice my values, notice how they kind of have a little bit of a tail that goes up here to the right. It's kind of stretched out to the right side. That's what we call skewed. So my values are skewed to the right. Or sometimes people might put these are skewed towards the larger numbers. Okay, what about the center? Where's the center of this distribution going to fall? Well, center can be described in one of two ways, either the mean or the median. Well, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and find the median. So hopefully we all remember how to do that. But the median is the number that divides them all into half. So the number that divides distribution in half. Okay, if I think about that, it's also what we might think of as our 50th percentile. It's the middle number. Okay, so we can do this a bunch of different ways. Here we have 36 values. There's actually kind of a shortcut to do it. You can find this by taking your number of values, add 1 to it, and divide by 2. So I have 36 numbers. I add once and divide by 2. And so that's going to go ahead and leave me with 18.5. So does that mean my median's 18.5? Well, that doesn't make sense. No, it's the 18.5 number. So I count in order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18.5. So it's this number right in here. So that's going to go ahead and be my median right in here. So how do I find it? Well, what I would do is I would take the average of these two numbers. So in this case, the number is 90 and 93. So the median would be 90 plus 93, and the average divided by 2 should leave us with 91.5. So now what we say, the median score for the game, or for all these games, is 91.5 points. That means half the people do better than 91.5 points and half the people do worse than that. So we could gauge on how well we need to do for our week in fantasy football, if that's the median. All right, and the last thing we want to talk about is spread. In this case, we'll just talk about range. So the range is between 50 and 151, so our range would be 101. All right, so the next graph we're talking about works right off of a stem and leaf, and it ties right back in with it, but we're going to do a box and whisker plot. Now, one of the nice things I failed to mention before is a stem and leaf plot's nice because it retains all of the values. I can go back and see what value everything was that I had in my fantasy football scores. This next graph is not going to be quite as nice as this. So when I make this graph here, this one's going to have some issues if I have a huge data set. I'm not going to want to sit here and make a stem and leaf plot for a huge data set. It's going to be a pain in the butt. So this works better for smaller ones, and it's nice because it does preserve the data. Okay, moving on, let's do a box plot, or a box and whiskers. So there's a couple different ways to do it. There's two different types. We have a modified box plot and a regular standard. What we do is the modified one. And the difference is the way that we deal with what we call outliers. Okay, so first off, how do I make my box and whisker plot? Well, we need to get what we call the 5-number summary. And the 5-number summary is a way that we can think about a data set as well. Okay, so it gives us the range of values as well as the quartiles. So we need to find the minimum number, we need to find Q1, the first quartile, the value that 25% of people are below it, the median, also known as the second quartile, 50% below, the third quartile, and then lastly what we want to find is the max. Okay, so there's the 5 values that we need to find, 5-number summary. All right, well the minimum is nice and easy in this one, it's 50. My Q1, okay, first let's find the median. Remember we did this in the last video, but let's go ahead and tie it in right here. So what I need to find is the middle number, okay? So again, we had 36 values, and I showed you this trick before. To find the median, you take your sample size, how many samples you have, add 1 and divide by 2. And in this case, 36 plus 1 divided by 2 is going to leave me with 18.5. So I count up 18 numbers, and I could count from both sides too and cancel them out. But I count to the 18th number, if you remember from the last part, it falls right between these two values. Here's my median. And we found it out, it was between 90 and 93, so we found the average of those two, and so it was 91.5. Okay, next thing we need to do, let's go ahead and find Q1. So it's the first quartile. So if you think about it, a quarter is half of half. So what I want to do now is I want to say, okay, here's my lower batch of numbers. All these ones in purple. This is my lower half. Let me find the median of that group. Well, if I do the math again, this time there would be, I don't include the median, so there would be 18 numbers below it. So again, I would do 18 plus 1 divided by 2, and that would fall at the 8.5 number, the average of 8. Count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And here's the 9, so it falls between 8 and 9. So Q1 is going to fall between 77 and 83. It's going to be the average of the two. And that's going to leave us with 80. So that's nice. Now I need to find Q3. So I need to find the half of the upper half. And again, there's still 18 values there, so it works out to be the 8.5. Now if I count from this way, just be careful. 1, 2, 3. I got to go in from top to bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8.5, so it's 122.5. Okay, to make my box and whisker plot, I scale and label my axes. And now what I'm going to do is these values are going to be my whiskers. This is going to make my box. So we'll see a box here, and we'll see whiskers that come out. So my lowest value is at 50. 80, I draw a line. 91, I draw a line. 122.5, I draw a line. I connect that as my box. And 151 is going to be our whisker. And I connect those in. And there's my box and whisker plot. Now this is a standard box and whisker plot. Sometimes we want to get rid of some values here. Okay, so what we want to see is if there's outliers, I want to get rid of those. I don't want to get rid of them, I want to be able to know that they're an outlier on the graph. So there's a couple steps that we're going to do to find an outlier on a graph. Now the first thing that I need to find is my IQR, the interquartile range. And what that tells me what does the middle 50% have for a variation? Because it gets rid of the extremes. Forget about the top 25, forget about the bottom 25. Let's look at the middle 50. That's what would be average or typical for most people. And so that's why we're going to look at the IQR. So how we find that is we take Q3 minus Q1, the middle 50%. So in this case it would be 122.5 minus 80, and that's going to leave me with 42.5. So the amount of variation that we have here is 42.5 units for the typical fantasy football matchup. Okay? All right, so how does this tie in with outliers? Okay, so what we want to look at now is how do we figure out what an outlier is? So an outlier is any value that falls more than 1.5 IQRs away from the quartiles. Alright, so that seems easy enough. So if I think about this visually as my IQR and I make it 50% bigger and I go away from this quartile, that gives me what we think of like an upper fence. Okay, so I have this increased by 50, I go away from there. Are there any values that are beyond that? And the answer in this case is no. Let's look at the lower one. Here it is, 50%, and go down below. Any values that are beyond that fence? And again, no. So let's just do the math to find our fences. So we'll call it the upper fence and lower fence. So I take my Q3, upper value, plus 1.5 times the IQR. All right, and that's going to leave us with, so 122.5 plus 1.5 times the IQR, which was, IQR is 42.5, and so 186.25. And do I have any values beyond that? No, so I don't need to worry about that value. If there was a value beyond that, what would happen is I'd come up here and it would be represented as a star. And we would connect to the next lowest value inside of that fence. So unless there's a value on the fence, it's never going to go out to the fence. All right, let's check the lower fence. So it'd be Q1 this time minus 1.5 times the IQR. So Q1 is 80 minus 1.5 times 42.5, and that leaves me with 16.25. And so I got 16.25 way down here. And again, we see that there's no value that's beyond that. So I have no outliers in this. And you might ask, why is it 1.5? Some dude decided 2 is too many, 1's not enough, so he picked 1.5. And it's just a standard that we use. So now describing this distribution, we see that it's still skewed to the right because this part's longer than that part. So we see it's stretched to the right, skewed to the right. And we can still see that no outliers. And we would talk about that variation as the IQR this time. All right, there's our box and whisker plot.